This is the Chapter 3 Stigma Podcast. This podcast was created to be there for any individual who feels like they are at a low point in life and are confused, seemingly alone, and helpless in their situation. I am a recovering alcoholic, and I felt this way too, until I sat across the table from another addict who shared his story and made me realize that I was not alone in my struggles. My life was saved by this realization, and I hope to help anyone struggling by sharing my story to show you that you are not alone and that life can contain unbelievable riches and meaning. Welcome. I am glad you are here. Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Chapter 3 Stigma Podcast. So the last podcast episode, I began with a preamble stating that I've been dragging my feet to get into steps 4 through 7 in the podcast, and wound up, I kind of made a game time decision to cut the previous podcast off in just covering step 4. The reason being is I really, again, aim to record and provide these podcasts for individuals that might feel like they are at their lowest low, like their options are running out, as I did intensely at the end of my battle with alcoholism. And I believe part of providing that type of content is to make these, as short as I can and to the point as I can, which is certainly a challenge for me. And so whenever I hit these kind of 20, 25-minute mark time periods for episodes in which I'm just delivering content from either the literature or my own experience or a combination of the two, I like to kind of draw a conclusion right around that time frame. This is pretty personal, but I truly think about before recording each podcast how when I was in the depths of my battle, and specifically when I was fighting the physical and emotional turmoil that came along with the detox period, I would find myself isolating, curled up in a corner of my basement with, like a sweatshirt on and a hood pulled over my head, just genuinely wondering what was wrong with me? Why does it feel like I'm the only one struggling? Why can't I break from this? I don't know that I had the ability, patience, or desire in that frame of mind to really consume anything for more than 20 minutes. And what I hope to deliver in these moments is maybe just a touch of hope or the potential for hope. So just kind of explaining why some of the times I get into topics and decide to call an audible, cut and seemingly cut things short, and delay getting into some topics. But I really want to ground, especially any of you that might be new to the channel or the podcast. Really, that is my hope, and that is who I am delivering this content and this message to. So, as I stated before, we wrapped up and covered step 4 in the last podcast episode. This podcast, we are going to get into chapter 6 in the book, which is called Into Action. And I want to caveat that with the first 4 steps certainly do require action. I kind of jokingly in my Alcoholics Anonymous book, on the title of chapter 6, in parentheses, I put with others. So I feel and have experienced that steps 5 through 7 are truly about the work that you are doing with another, leading you through these ever so critical steps. So I have a fair amount of content to cover from the literature, but again, I'm going to pull myself out and overlay my experiences and my perception on some of this content. So with that, to the book. We have admitted certain defects. We have put our finger on the weak items in our personal inventory. Now these are about to be cast out. This requires action on our part, which, when completed, will mean that we have admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our defects. This brings us to the 5th step in the program of recovery. And on that note, I am going to cycle back and read the steps that we're going to cover today. So step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Step 7, humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. And before I get back into the book, I'm going to just touch on this, the importance of step 5, and a lot of the content that I'm going to read today is justifying the reason for step 5. But step 5 is entirely critical because, as we'll get into, without opening up and admitting to another human being, all of that work, all of that writing that is done on the 4th step, taking your personal inventory, can still just live within you as a secret and eating at you. And that's really the critical and valuable aspect of this step, is to cast all of this baggage, all of this terrible, unsaleable inventory out. And it can only be done by sitting down and looking another human being in the eyes and speaking to God about it, to rid yourself of all the wrongs that you have felt that you have done. Now back to the book. This is perhaps difficult, especially discussing our defects with another person. We think we have done well enough in admitting these things to ourselves. There is doubt about that. If we skip this vital step, we may not overcome drinking. Time after time, newcomers have tried to keep to themselves certain facts about their lives. Trying to avoid this humbling experience, they have turned to easier methods. Almost invariably, they got drunk. And I just want to pause and reflect back on the previous sentence, talking about the humility, the humbling experience of the process of talking to another person. And maybe it's appropriate that I slipped up there and almost referenced humiliation, because that is what a lot of people feel is going to happen, that by speaking these truths and these deep, dark parts of their being and of their experience out loud, that they're going to be humiliated, that they're going to be judged. But it is quite the opposite. And I can say from personal experience, resoundingly, what I gained from doing the 5th step, from sitting down with another individual. And this step, I referenced in the last podcast, writing your inventory took me at least 1.5 to 2 hours to write out what is ultimately 11 pages of baggage from my past. And that process really started to flow once I got started. But the act of sitting down and discussing each and every one of these resentments and these pieces of my life and my story with another person, this was something that took 4 hours for me to do with my sponsor, is who I chose to open up to about it. What I gained from that was I completely lost my fear of judgment. I could, for the first time in my life, hear me speak my faults, humbly admitted out loud. And the power of them was lost. They had for years controlled and manipulated me because I didn't want to face them. I wanted to suppress them. But by speaking them out loud, I lost that fear that I had in them, and they completely lost their power over me. So with that, back to the book. They took they took inventory, all right. This is in, just a note, this is in regards to people who do the 4th step but don't feel the necessity to take step 5. So they took inventory, all right, but hung on to some of the worst items in stock. They only thought they had lost their egoism and fear. They only thought they had humbled themselves, but they had not learned enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense we find it necessary until they told someone else all their life story. More than most people, the alcoholic leads a double life. He is very much the actor. To the outer world, he presents his stage character. He wants to enjoy a certain reputation, but knows in his heart he doesn't deserve it. The inconsistency is made worse by the things he does on his sprees. Coming to his senses, he is revolted at certain episodes he vaguely remembers. These memories are a nightmare. He trembles to think someone might have observed him. As fast as he can, he pushes these memories far inside of himself. He hopes they will never see the light of day. He is under constant fear and tension. That makes for more drinking. And I'm going to pause here. I don't know that I've ever talked about this exercise that I did in rehab, but it is entirely applicable to this section of the book, talking about the double life. And the way that this came present in my story and in my mind was in rehab, they had us do, it was actually an art therapy exercise, which going into it, I didn't think much of it. I didn't think much would come from it. But this exercise, we were just presented with a mask, and we were told to do and create whatever we felt in the moment with that mask. And so, people are putting all kinds of patterns on it. I didn't really know what to do. And so I took the outward facing portion of the mask and just started painting. And what wound up happening was I painted a scene: green grass, flowers blooming, blue sky, 2 clouds in the sky, and sunlight. And part of the way through that, I realized, holy cow, this is what I want the world to see. This is what I present to the world. This picture that everything is fine and everything is exactly as I want it to be. And realizing this, I finished that front facing portion and I turned it around, and I decided to create what I was actually feeling inwardly. And on the inside facing portion of the mask, I painted it all black. And then I wrote words in either white or black or red regarding the way that I viewed myself. Liar, failure, do nothing. And just the way that self-talk manifested in my life. And I finished that session, and it was like I just turned that mask around in my head, and I realized what a difference each side of the mask presented and how difficult and painful of a life that it had led to, trying to keep that outward perception while this inner turmoil was raging. I set that mask on a shelf in the kitchen space, and the last morning that I was in rehab, the final action that I took prior to walking out of the doors is I remembered that mask was sitting up on a shelf, and I went and grabbed it and I threw it away. Almost every other piece of work that I had done in my time in rehab, I held on to. But I knew there was something about that mask, this double life, that I wanted to be ridden of and completely done with. And the act of throwing it away was entirely healing for me. And then I got to go through that process again as I worked the 4th and 5th step. So with that, back to the book. Unwilling to be honest with these sympathetic men, and I skipped ahead a bit, so these sympathetic men are clergymen and doctors. So unwilling to be honest with these sympathetic men, We were honest with no one else. Small wonder many in the medical profession have a low opinion of alcoholics and their chance for recovery. We must be entirely honest with somebody if we expect to live long or happily in this world. Of course, we sometimes encounter people who do not understand alcoholics. We cannot disclose anything to our wives or our parents which will hurt them and make them unhappy. We have no right to save our own skin at another person's expense. Such parts of our story we tell to someone who will understand, yet be unaffected. And I'm going to pause from the book here. I jumped numerous paragraphs through that time, through that reading. So let me kind of tie it all together. This section of the book is talking about how to select someone to sit down with to admit all of your faults, all of your resentments, all of your wrongdoings, all of your shortcomings of character. How do you select the right person? And so that's why it calls out and recommends against disclosing anything to really your closest loved ones. And this sentence is so imperative. We have no right to save our own skin at another person's expense. Sometimes the things that are written in your inventory are too much for you to place on an individual that you are close with and have a lot of history with. That's why the sponsorship model works so well. That is why a vast majority of people who are entering into recovery and working the steps select their sponsor to be the person that they sit down with and work their fifth step with. That's what I did. He was by and large the best person for me to admit all of my faults to. And again, it is helpful because this is another person who is an alcoholic who has found the solution, so they can understand you, yet they are not close enough with you that they would be affected. Back to the book. When we decide who is to hear our story, we waste no time. We have a written inventory and we are prepared for a long talk. Pulling out of the literature, again, as I said, this was a 4-hour discussion for me. I left this conversation entirely exhausted, but feeling completely free and a level of lightheartedness that I have never felt in my life up to that point. Back to the book. This is the individual that is listening, he should realize that we are engaged upon a life and death errand. This is me again coming out of the literature. This is, again, why it is very beneficial to have this done with a sponsor. They know how imperative this step is, and it truly is life and death. As I was going through this step, my sponsor asked me numerous times, is there anything else? Have you been thorough? And it was so critical to continue to dig and dig deeper because there were aspects and character defaults that were not readily called out or available just from my inventory list. We had to just talk through them and follow trails and follow themes. Back to the book. We pocket our pride and go for it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. Once we have taken this step, withholding nothing, we are delighted. We can look the world in the eye. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Our fears fall from us. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. Returning home, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour, carefully reviewing what we have done. We thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know Him better. Taking this book down from our shelf, we turn to the page which contains the 12 steps. Carefully reading the first 5 proposals, we ask if we have omitted anything, for we are building an arch through which we shall walk a free man at last. Is our work solid so far? Are the stones properly in place? Have we skimped on the cement put into the foundation? Have we tried to make mortar without sand? And this paragraph is talking about a complete and utter review with honesty at the forefront. Back to the book. If we can answer to our satisfaction, we then look at step 6. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? Can he now take them all, every one? If we still cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. When ready, we say something like this: My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. We have then completed step 7. So, coming out of the book and going back to the actual steps, and particularly looking at steps 6 and 7, because they do kind of run together in this literature. Step 6, we were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. And step 7, humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. So, again, step 6 is really, are you prepared? Are you ready? And step 7 is the request. And just that prayer, again, that's written out in the Alcoholics Anonymous book. And as I covered in the podcast on a typical AA meeting, oftentimes this 7-step prayer is said during Alcoholics Anonymous meetings to continue to revisit and continue to come back to. The thing that I want to wrap up on and just draw attention to is, yes, this is where the action with others start. And this is really where, when it comes down to it, you are grinding. You are just having to put yourself in these situations which certainly make you feel uncomfortable. They are churning up aspects of your life and memories from your life that you've suppressed, that you have not wanted to willingly face. But the end result is worth every bit of pain, discomfort, and bit of suffering that has come along throughout the years. Again, the 2 words that I have written in the margins of my book next to the summary of the 5th step, and the way I left it was exhausted but light. It was a completely new freedom and new perspective that I had not felt really at any point up to my life. I felt cleansed and I felt renewed. And that's the power in these steps. If you are truly honest, if you are truly willing to do the work, you can know that new freedom that you never knew was possible. And if you are thinking about entering into this most meaningful work, I wish you the best, and I wish you nothing but genuine honesty and freedom from those things which burden you. And that's all I've got for this week. Thanks again for following along. Love you all. If you enjoyed this podcast, share it with others or give us a rating on your channel of choice. My hope is that my story can help others in their struggles with addiction or any other aspects of life that they feel could be bettered. You can follow us on social media at Chapter 3 Stigma on Instagram and YouTube. I cannot solve your problems for you, but I can listen. If you want to reach out with a message through one of those channels, I will respond and let you know that you are not alone. All the best, you are loved, and life is worth every struggle and bit of suffering you have to endure. Until next time, all the best.